Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Jeff Yeager, who is the co founder at CargoShot. And we're going to talk about CargoShot, how Jeff came to found the company, and a little bit about his background. And we're going to talk about the importance of capturing proof of condition of freight and how CargoShot is helping to alleviate fines, penalties, chargebacks, and freight claims, and giving overall supply chain accountability when it comes to moving your goods throughout the supply chain and helping to be proactive with that too. So, Jeff, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Good morning. Thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to get you on here and happy to talk about this topic, learn more about Cargo Shot. I know in my career, I was at one point in charge of researching chargebacks and penalties from some of the big names out there, and that was not a fun thing to do. So I'm definitely interested to hear about Cargo Shot and how you're helping with that. But before we dive into that, I mean, why don't you give us kind of a little bit of your background? You're the co-founder at Cargo Shot, so tell us a little bit about your background and how it kind of led up to founding Cargo Shot, and maybe what did you see out there that kind of made sense that I want to solve this problem.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So a little bit about my background. Went to school at Ohio State University, studied transportation and logistics. Was there on a Navy ROTC scholarship. So post graduation, I was commissioned a second lieutenant and served in the Marine Corps in a combat billet. Um, but in addition to combat operations and deployments, there was also a logistical component to what I was doing, moving heavy equipment around the world and um, specifically amphibious vehicles. Um, After leaving the Marine Corps, then I got into the logistics space because that was where my degree was. And a buddy of mine who was in the Marines with me said, "Hey, why don't you come work for our family business?" And I kept putting him off. And then finally one day I'd been married and we were thinking about starting a family and looking for a little more stable environment. So we made the jump from the Marine Corps um, to the civilian world. And that's where my civilian logistics um, work really started. So I worked in the dairy industry with Dean Foods Company for 17 years, doing transportation and logistics. Got my MBA from Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. Um,
Mm.
and then after leaving the dairy industry, I went to work in the 3PL world as VP of operations for a large local 3PL in the North Carolina area. And that's really
Okay.
where the cargo shot journey started. Basically, in the 3PL world, clients come and go, and we prefer they stay and have mutual success for both our party and theirs. But um, as part of that constant change and turnover, we got some people that came into the business that had retail business. They were doing business with big box retailers, and one of the things that happens in that particular space is they have these things called vendor guides. And inside these vendor guides, they spell out all the things that you need to do to to do business with that particular retailer, from the height of
Mm.
your pallet to the labeling to deliveries. I mean, if you look at some of these guides, they're 30, 40, 50, 70 pages long for compliance. And in our particular case, I was receiving fines and penalties from several big box retailers. And
Mm.
quite frankly, I didn't think we were as bad as what we were getting penalized for. And so I would write emails and make phone calls. And at the end of the day, it was just like, you just got to pay. And it was tens
Yeah.
of thousands of dollars every month in fines and penalties. And so one day I started taking photographs with a camera in a warehouse. And I started sending those photographs in with a time and date stamp on them, and so they could clearly see the product. And all of a sudden, I started getting some relief on some of these fines and penalties. And it was significant. I mean, 20 grand a month or more was coming through for broken pallets, missing packing slips, exceeding height requirements, labeling issues, and whatnot. But with those photographs, I was able to prove that we did our job correctly, or in the cases where we didn't, then I could go back to whoever made the mistake and then internally have a coaching session and drive accountability in that process. And so we were able to drive those fines and penalties down significantly, not to zero, because we weren't perfect, but by 75, almost 80%. So a huge impact to the bottom line. And the problem with that solution is it wasn't scalable. I couldn't run it across different warehouses because we were using cameras and taking a picture, and then you got to take the card out and download it and name the file
Wow.
something that you can remember who the client was, the date, the time. And then these fines and penalties, they didn't show up generally right away. They showed up 3, 4, 6 months later. Some I got 2 years in arrears that they were sending
Mm.
me bills for. And so researching that and then making sure that people reprogram the cameras and put the right time and date stamp in, it just was not not repeatable and not scalable across our dozen warehouses. So that was the idea of CargoShot, is to create a platform, a mobile application that was flexible, configurable, that you could capture the data you needed in real time, store it, and then go back and find it. Um, and then take that information and use it as a coaching training session for your team, but also to prove that you did your job right. Or in the cases that if you didn't, then you could come to resolution quicker and, just own up through that customer service function and move on. So that pain and suffering, that's what brought us to Cargo Shot. And then I have two partners, John and Ed, who joined me in the
Mhm.
journey. John I'd worked with previously. Uh, I was a customer of his, and then I was doing some consulting for him. And then Ed knew John through another relationship. So the three of us got together and founded Cargo Shot.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting, and I love that it was like a personal pain that you were feeling yourself to come up with this solution, and I think it makes so much sense. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I was on the same end where these big box retailers sending stuff to them and trying to dispute with them sometimes just seemed like pointless in a sense because it was very hard to prove some things that they were claiming, and they don't provide, at least at the time when I was doing this, I mean, they don't provide like proof on their end that there actually was a violation. You just had to take their word for it, and like you said, ultimately you just end up paying, right, unless you have that kind of great backup to do that. And that's hard to do at scale, as you mentioned, when you're shipping out a bunch of volume, and you're trying to capture everything. So it's great that you guys have focused on that and come up with a solution for that. So maybe let's talk about a little bit. Why are some of these big box retailers? I mean, why do they put in these requirements and compliance types of things? I mean, you mentioned compliance book could be 50, 60 pages, right? To have all the requirements that they want for freight coming inbound to them. Why do they put those in place?
Well, I think they originally started probably for a good reason. They have a lot of people coming
Mhm.
into their warehouses, and they needed some consistency to be efficient in their operation. Um, so I think that was probably the impetus for it, to gain those internal efficiencies. But I think something's happened along the way, and not necessarily
Mm.
with every retailer or every warehouse, but people realized, and I'm aware of this in several legitimate um, large companies where it's become a profit center, right? They actually budget now
Yeah.
in their a line item in there for fines and penalties, and they're hitting those numbers, every year. And in some cases, I'm personally aware of the finances are larger than the company projected profit, so they're not going to go away. And
Wow. Yeah.
so but I think again, legitimately, it started as a way for them to, have efficiencies in their warehouse and handle stuff quickly and get things through, and that makes complete sense. And if I were them, I would totally want that. So it just needs to be fair and equitable, and um, it just can't be a one-way street, because overall, if it's not, it just raises the cost throughout the supply chain for everyone. So when I was in the dairy industry, we had someone doing that And it just got so expensive. We raised the price, and finally they said, "Well, why is the price going up?" And we said, "Well, you're fining us millions of dollars a year in fines and penalties, and
Yeah.
we it's not part of our budget, so it's got to come from somewhere. We don't want to lose the business, but so ultimately they stopped a lot of those fines and penalties, except for the stuff that was probably truly accurate, and we fixed
Mm,
that. So, um, but that's our job. We want to be in both places in the supply chain. We want to be at the receiving side when they bring it into their warehouse, and we want to be on the shipping. It's shipped from the 3PL warehouse or the manufacturer. We want to play with the trucking companies. So there's a clear chain of custody from start to finish. And if there is an issue, you hold the right party accountable, not just the sender, or the shipper,
mm,
or so. Um, and it works. I mean,
yeah.
we have food companies, we have medical device companies, we have 3PL warehouses, and they're all benefiting um, from this increased visibility and accountability.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely, and I can see that being helpful on all ends because I think, like you said, I mean, it's some of it is certainly justified in wanting things to come in a certain way to be able to have those operational efficiencies on the receiver side, but like you said, in some cases, a little. Maybe pushing it a little bit to up the profit, as you mentioned, or just trying to generate revenue based off fines or things of that nature. So it's great that you're looking at it from all the different points of where that freight is going through and that those goods are passing through. So I guess tell us a little bit about that because I saw on the website that you're kind of capturing that the proof of condition, I think is the term that you guys use for that freight at all the different points that it's going through. So I guess leaving the shipper and then potentially at a cross dock and then to the receiver. So tell us about why that's important to capture that at all points and how you're enabling that to happen.
So yeah, it's important for the accountability aspect. So if you're a shipper and you get a fine and penalty for damaged freight, but it left your
Yeah.
dock in good condition and you did proper blocking and bracing on the truck, then that's a carrier issue, and the carrier should be held accountable for that. If you're a carrier and you drop something off in your dock, and I've worked with carriers on this, and the customer says, "Well, it came in damaged," and then come to find out later that their own employee actually damaged it, you know,
Mm.
either during offloading or someone smashed into it after it was just sitting there on the dock. So it's just about that transparency and that visibility. So the right the right party is held accountable, and that's why it's so important. And ultimately, we want to drive those costs out of the supply chain, right? Because it just raises the cost for everybody. Anytime there's a freight claim
Mm.
or there's damage or fines or penalties, um, it's not free. Someone pays, and ultimately, if there's enough of it going on, the consumer pays.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so now with the cargo shot, I mean, you're obviously trying to capture this information and drive those costs down, as you mentioned. And you mentioned it's a mobile app. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, how that interaction happens. Like, how are you actually capturing that proof of condition at these different points?
Sure. So there's two basic components to our product. The first is a mobile app, and we use what's called a PWA, a progressive web
Mm.
app. So we're hardware agnostic. Um, we don't care. All we need is a browser, and we work with
Mm.
any browser, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Microsoft Edge. It doesn't matter. We're not in the hardware business. We're not trying to sell you a cell phone or a scanner. We want to use the devices that you currently have in your building and be as painless as possible to integrate. So all we really need is an internet connection and a web browser to use that mobile app. And then on the mobile app side, we have it set up in 5 different buckets. So we have inbound, outbound, pickup, delivery, and we have a thing called load. So the reason that there's 5 different buckets is just to make it easy and intuitive for people to use. But the fields that are in there are totally configurable. So you can capture all the ancillary information at the time, like a date and timestamp, the GPS location of where the photograph was taken, the carrier, the bill of lading number, a driver's license if you want from the person that's picking it up. Um, it's You can create your own labels. We have stock stuff, but if you don't like it, you can totally rename it and do it any way you want. So, but if you're shipping a product, you would obviously pick outbound, and if you're a carrier, you would click on pick up and pick up the information that's critical to you, and maybe all you care about is a photo and a bill of lading number, but maybe you
Mm,
want more data, so we can handle that either way. But that data gets captured along with the photograph. It gets uploaded to our cloud, and then we store it there. And you can go in on what we call our admin side or our dashboard side. Then you can go in there and see that information, see the photographs, all the information with the load. But then you can also mine it and see trends. So if you're always getting damage from a certain carrier or from a certain shipper, if you're on the receiving side, you can see that and you can document it. And then you can go back to them and say, hey, when we receive this product, you know what, we're getting these solar panels in and the boxes are always damaged. And um, so is there a problem with the way that they're loading the truck? Is there a problem with the packaging? All that information is there now, and you can have a really good, robust discussion on how to fix it and get better.
mm,
Um, Same thing, the load function. We put that in there because one of our 3PL providers wanted the ability to take a photograph of a fully loaded trailer before it departed, and they were
mm,
photographing every pallet as it was putting on board. So at the end, they use that load function to see the blocking, the bracing, the way the truck was loaded before they close the door. And if they close the door, they put a seal on it, they take another picture of that. So there's no
mm.
disputing on how that stuff was loaded and was it done properly. And were there load bars in there? Were there, if it's a container, did they have to take some lumber and nail it to the floor to keep things from shifting, or,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
their process is? Okay, now you've got that documentation. And then, if something happens to that, a ship hits a bridge in Baltimore, you can go back and say, this is the freight that was in that
Yeah.
container. You can see, it was secured properly. Here's the seal number, you know, and you have all that information right at your fingertips. And one of the really cool things we do is you can then email that from our dashboard to your client with a link. And we don't send you a bunch of pictures, we send you a link that's small. And then the photographs are maintained on our side. So there's no editing, no photoshopping, no tampering with anything. And then you can reveal all or just some of the photos, whatever you choose, to your client. So
Mm,
instantly. And we see that. We have like one client right now that was having an issue with packing slips, and they were going to lose like 25 to 30% of their US business with one client because
oh, wow.
continually I didn't get a packing slip. And we knew that they were
Mm,
getting the packing slips. And sure enough, the VP of that particular company was on site with that client. They said, once again, you didn't have packing slips. And they said, well, all those pallets should be shrink wrapped with blue shrink wrap that have a packing slip on them. And
mhm,
and also we'll send you the photographs for every pallet. And then they went over there, and sure enough, the packing slips were there, and we sent them a month's worth of data, and that ended it. They didn't lose the
oh, wow.
client. Um, and now we're part of their customer support team. So when their customer service reps get a phone call from any of their clients and they complain about something, they go right into CargoShot. They pull up that order number or that delivery number. They look at the
Mhm,
photographs. If there's an issue, they own up to it right on the spot and resolve it. They don't have to escalate it to a supervisor or a manager. Or if not, they
mm,
send it right back to the customer and say, "Here's where you need to look. Here's what was done." And so that's cut.
mm.
It's been a huge time saver for them, and they're using us in all their U.S. warehouses. Um, so it's not just about fines and penalties and chargebacks. It's a great customer service component too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that story is just like proof there to, how much that capturing that information and having that on hand can help save business for you and help those relationships too with your clients. Like you mentioned, that was 25 to 30% of their U.S. business, which is a big chunk of business, right? And over packing slips, right? And but being able to have that accountability in a sense and have that reference point, I think is a huge thing. And I certainly utilize some regular CCTV cameras to push back on claims from customers before too as well. And I think having this as a more standardized process and something that you can easily draw from, I think makes a huge amount of sense and definitely a time savings instead of having to search through or maybe not even having any record at all. So I think that's really great what you guys have built and that you're putting together for people to be able to capture that information and potentially save them a ton of money on the fine or chargeback side, penalty side, or just saving their business and clients, like that example that you gave. So I'm curious, as you look at this, and obviously you guys are seeing a lot of data and talking to a lot of customers around these problems. What are some of the, I guess, maybe most frequently cited violations out there that you see?
So excuse me, missing packing slips, broken pallets, pallet height exceeding the spec for that warehouse, labeling issues. Do they have a packing slip? Is it have the right information on it? Is it in the right spot? Some clients want it in the lower right hand corner, other people want it in the top right. Those type of things are the most common damage. And then I would say missing items. Hey, I didn't get this. So you can very easily see if there's 50 cases on a pallet and there's 50 cases there with a photograph. You can see
Yeah.
those tie highs and get pretty doggone close. Now if you have different size boxes, it gets a little harder, but nonetheless, it's you can see how that truck was loaded, and if there were supposed to be 5 pallets on there, you can see those 5 pallets. So
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting to hear that because, it's curious, like, the things that really are happening frequently and then how do you solve for those? So as you are kind of collecting that information for your customers and your customers are collecting that information, or even in your past experience when you're the VP of ops for that 3PL, I mean, how do you take kind of all of that information and look at the frequency at these violations occurring, and how do you take that back and be proactive and make some corrective measures to prevent those from happening?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, there's the training component, right? If you do have issues, you're going to know it, and now you can go back and sit with the individual or individuals that did the work and show them, why did you let this get out of the building without a packing slip, or why did you send a broken pallet out? So there's that component of it. Um, we're also working on technology using computer vision, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to be proactive, that we have in development today, where um, this, doing some really unique proprietary stuff that would be preventative in nature. So it would essentially alert you to the issue before it happens, so you don't ship it and incur the fine and penalty to
Oh,
begin with.
nice.
So
Yeah.
that's something that we think is unique. And if we look at the world, this is about a $1.6 trillion problem across the world and about a $160 billion
Wow.
problem in the US. So it's not an insignificant issue. And there's just not a lot of people tackling it. And I think a lot of people have dealt with the issue for so long, they just accept it, right? It's like, well, we just do the
Yeah.
best we can. But you don't have to live like that any longer. We have
Yeah.
some pain medicine for you that can help in a real meaningful way. So, and um,
Mm.
and we're working on some other unique technology too to allow people that aren't customer of ours to provide the information back at no charge to our users.
Mm.
So, um, obviously, can't go too deep into that stuff, but some of that stuff will be coming over the next few months. So, pretty unique.
Okay.
And we want to change the logistics space. We don't want to be just about pictures. We really want to drive innovation in the supply chain, um, at a
Mhm.
reasonable cost, so that it's affordable for everybody. So
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very interesting, and I think it's a great thing to want to push it even further. So, but you said 1.6 trillion is the problem. I mean, that's 1.6 trillion in like chargebacks that are taken every
cro-
year, basically.
across the globe, yeah, it's a huge,
Wow.
huge number. Um,
Yeah, that's insane.
so it's a hard number to get to. You have
Mm,
to kick a lot of cans to kind of get to it, but it's a big nut. And if you can
yeah,
just tackle, if even if we could just solve 10% of that, it's $160 billion. So
yeah,
I mean, think about how many customers you would have to add to get that kind of margin on your business in supply chain and logistics, right?
yeah. Wow.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's
just it's mind boggling.
yeah, it's staggering for sure. So as we look at that and we look at that number, and are you seeing that companies are, I guess, maybe getting maybe lenient isn't the right word, maybe, but are they, as we look towards like the future in terms of like these chargebacks and penalties? I mean, are you seeing that companies are reducing the amount of things that they're getting charged back or penalized for, or are you seeing that more receivers are adding additional things? I mean, what does, in your eyes, I mean, what does the future of kind of this chargeback and penalty situation look like?
I don't think it's going away, and that's why we
Mm,
want to play on the proactive side to avoid it right
yeah,
from the start. We think that that's really where the good companies really want to play is don't let me deal with it on the back end. Stop it from happening before it leaves. And that's the direction that we're moving towards now. We're not quite there yet, but today, we can help deal with the issues, as they occur. So um, so that's meaningful. I think, you know as there's consolidation in the industry, as the bigger players get bigger, they're going to dictate more things. Smaller companies, it's hard for them. If you're a mid or small size company and you're dealing with these big box retailers, um, it's a big part of your profit to not incur those costs, right? So, there's an incentive there for them to do it right, but I think the labor situation today is getting worse, not better. In supply chain and warehouses in particular, people use a lot of temp labor, particularly in the 3PL world, and they augment it
yeah,
in the big box retailers. So, someone that's new that's had 2 days of training or 2 weeks of training, they're just going through the motions as best that they can. Um, if they think that there's an issue, they're going to check it on the receiving side. If Same thing on the shipping side, maybe they forgot. It's their first day on the job and somebody got busy and there was nobody looking over
mm,
their shoulder, right? So, I mean, those things are happening, but, I just think supply chain is such an important place, but there's so many hurdles right now. Um,
mm,
the cost of implementing new technology, that's going to be a high cost, um, provider. We want to be a reasonable cost provider. And, we want to help people do things quickly. And if they have new employees or temp employees in their system, it's intuitive, it's easy for them to use. They're used to using their cell phone or an iPad or any of those types of devices. And if they've worked in other warehouses, they've used a scanner. So even
mm,
though they may have different functions or buttons to push, but they generally have that ability today. And people that maybe are in their late 50s and early 60s that are still working that aren't super literate, at least it makes sense to them. They can see the flow, right? and they can
Mhm.
follow that. And it's, we can be up and running in 45 minutes and people catch on and we just don't hear from people because it just works. So,
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting some of the factors that you mentioned there, especially like around the labor challenges itself, where you see, not used to processes, and especially if the processes are very like rigid and a lot of different things. I mean, I remember one company I worked for, we had one of the things that were happening is that I guess the way we were generating packaging, there was a certain barcode on our cases, and one retailer didn't like that barcode. So we had like one person, and their job was just to cross out that barcode on the label all day long. And they're just doing that continuously. And having those little nuances and things like that, and it can easily, I think, get lost if you don't have those type processes, or you're having some temp labor that isn't quite familiar with the processes and things like that. So I think it's pretty interesting. And I mean, obviously that 160 billion dollars in US, 1.6 trillion in the world on this stuff. I mean, it's going to take a lot for that to go down, but I definitely appreciate what you guys are trying to do in helping to combat that and alleviate that. And I think at the end of the day, ultimately what it's doing is it's just making those operations even better, right? I mean, it's having them step up, be more cognizant of what they're sending out the door, which I think is makes the entire supply chain just move smoother, and have that flow be even better. So very interesting stuff with you here, Jeff, and really interesting to learn about CargoShot and also what's going on in the world of these chargebacks and penalties here. So, if people are interested in learning more about CargoShot, and think maybe it's a right fit for their operation, what's the best way to do that?
yeah, they can check out our website at www.cargoshot.com. There's a form in there they can fill out, and then we get that, and we'll be happy to return your phone call. Um, or they can call us directly, on the phone at 847 which is my cell phone, and I'll answer that and be happy to talk with folks.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well so people can easily find it. So, Jeff, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
All right. Thanks, Kevin, for having me. Really appreciate it. Love the show.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast. And I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel. And if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.